All right. Anna, you can just see the PowerPoint?
Yes, I can.
Okay, let's talk about the farm labor contractor. Let me get rid of those reminders here. There we go. Okay, yeah, let's talk about how to navigate the farm labor contractor license process. Now, being a farm labor contractor complicates the H-2A filing process quite a bit. The other thing about being a farm labor contractor is there's additional scrutiny on you as a farm labor contractor. The DOL really likes to go after farm labor contractors because there are a lot more regulatory requirements for them. So it's just a more difficult, more expensive, more time consuming process, but it is possible to navigate. So let's talk about how you do that. Okay, so first of all, what is a farm labor contractor? And you'll also hear farm labor contractors referred to as H-2A LC. That's what that means. H-2A, the visa program, LC labor contractor, is a employer that's not a fixed site employer, agricultural association, or an employee of a fixed site employer, agricultural association, who recruits, solicits, hires, employs, furnishes, houses, or transports any workers subject to H-2A regulations. So oftentimes, the easier way to think about who is a farm labor contractor is generally that is someone who is performing an agricultural labor or service on someone else's farm. That's the most applicable way. Of course, there's other ways that you're a farm labor contractor, such as if you're recruiting farm labor, or if you're recruiting workers, the people that are filing your application on your behalf are supposed to have a farm labor contractor's license. So like our law firm has a farm labor contractor's license. Anyone that recruits on your behalf should have a farm labor contractor's license. But generally speaking, here the most applicable area is if you are performing work on someone else's farm. So that's where it normally comes up. So what are the special requirements for farm labor contractors? So farm labor contractors need what's called an FLC license, a farm labor contractor's license, in most circumstances. There are very limited circumstances where the employer, such as custom combine operations that are exempt from having the certificate of registration, they still need to go through a lot of the requirements of being a farm labor contractor. Like you still need to have some of the other documents for filing. You still need a surety bond, those sorts of things, but you don't have to go through the certificate of registration process because they're exempt from the registration process under MSPA. The current processing times for the FLC for getting a farm labor contractor's license in the first place, whenever we call the office, which we have this week, they keep saying 17 weeks is how long it's taking from receipt of farm labor contractor's license application to approval of farm labor contractor's license. They've also said that it's getting faster, but every time we call and ask for a time frame, they say 17 weeks is still what they're saying, which is a lot longer than it used to be. It used to be 4 to 6 weeks was pretty normal. But then at the beginning of last year, they changed their system over and it created a big backlog. And now they've, I think, just struggled to get through the backlog. So whenever you're submitting a renewal of your FLC application, which they have amended the rules. They used to only let you do it 30 to 60 days in advance of the expiration. Now they allow you to do it up to 90 days in advance of the expiration. And I highly recommend that you do, because what they're sending out right now, because of the delays, they're sending out this document that's called an authority to operate letter. But the authority to operate letter is subject to your timely renewal of your FLC license. So basically the letter says you can continue to operate as an FLC while your application is pending, only if your application was received timely. This makes a big difference in terms of the actual certification of your labor certification with the Department of Labor, because that is something that they'll cross-reference. So pay a lot of attention to that, to the renewal and updating of your FLC license. And be sure to renew and update it prior to expiration, not only of the actual certificate of registration, but there's also a expiration date of your transportation authorization, which also needs to be updated prior to that expiry. Now, normally you can't update that part 30, 69 days in advance, because a lot of times your insurance company is the reason that it is lapsing and they won't let you renew that far in advance. But you do need to have your updated FLC application with the Department of Labor prior to the expiration of the transportation authorization or the actual farm labor contractor's license. Okay, so whenever you're filing a labor certification for a farm labor contractor, one of the other things that you're required to have is a surety bond. The surety bond amount varies based off the number of workers. I guess one important thing that we could go over real quick is, what is the purpose of a surety bond? Because I get that question all the time. Well, why do I need a surety bond? Well, the regulations require you to have a surety bond, but why do the regulations require you to have a surety bond if you're a farm labor contractor? And the rationale behind that is the Department of Labor doesn't have necessarily any sort of assets that they can tie their investigation to with farm labor contractors, because a lot of times they're only performing labor. So in theory, you could violate the H-2A regulations. Department of Labor comes after you, you're issued a fine, big back wages, and they have nothing because you were just able to bankrupt the company. You just take the company through bankruptcy, it's all done with. So that's actually the purpose of the surety bond. The surety bond offsets that risk, so the Department of Labor can at least call the surety, the bond, to then pay for some of those things, back wages in particular. So you can think of it as basically insurance on your company paying your workers. And that's why the amount varies based off of the number of workers. You need a $5,000 surety bond if you're seeking a labor certification with fewer than 25 workers, $10,000 if between 25 and 49 workers, $20,000 if between 50 and 74 workers, $50,000 if you're between 75 and 99 workers, $75,000 if you're at 100 or more workers. Now that the bond amount is not the same as the cost of the bond. Those are very different things. The actual bond won't cost nearly that much money, but the cost of the bond does vary based off the individual, because the bonding company will look at the credit of the individual. I think they do a soft inquiry into the credit of the applicant, and they'll see, okay, do they have good credit, not so good credit? If not so good credit, the cost of the bond goes up. If you have really good credit, $5,000 bond is $150, $200. 75,000, $1,200, $1,500. So it's pretty normal pricing range there for bonds. So yes, the other aspect of filing the application is your FLCE certificate. The FLCE certificate is actually for employees of the farm labor contractor. So these are people that are authorized to drive and transport your workers. There's an actual application that you submit for your farm labor contractor's license. And then there's another application that you would submit for your FLCE certificate of registration. So it's really similar. The only difference is you fill out the application a little bit differently, and the supporting documentation is a bit different. So your FLCEs need to be accompanied by a fingerprint card, which you can get at pretty much any police station. That's how people normally do it. You need a copy of the driver's license of the individual, front and back. And you need a medical inspection of the individual performed by a doctor. And there's a specific form that the Department of Labor uses for that. It's pretty straightforward. So the number of drivers that you need is dependent on a couple of things. It's dependent on the number of workers you're seeking to transport and the vehicle seating capacity of each vehicle. So let's say that I have a 15 passenger van and I'm applying for 14 workers. I have an FLCE, myself, not an H-2A worker, but I have an FLCE. Perfect, because then I've got 14 additional seats for my 14 workers. But let's say that I am seeking 15 employees. My FLCE is not an H-2A worker. Again, it's myself. What does that mean? That means that because I don't have enough seating capacity, I need another vehicle and another driver to accommodate all my workers. So you need one FLCE per vehicle and one unused seat for each H-2A worker. Makes sense. So one of the other things that you have to get whenever you're filing an H-2A application as a farm labor contractor is a work contract between you and the fixed site agricultural business. We call this a farm labor agreement or an owner agreement or an ingress egress agreement, and the combination of those varies based off of who's applying in the relationship to the farmer. But all of your fully executed work contracts, and they need to be fully executed. That means signed by both parties. It needs to include the name and location of each fixed site agricultural business. So that would be Amy's Apples at 111 West Apple Street, Washington, whatever. Expected beginning and end date. So when you think your workers are going to arrive at their farm, when your workers are going to leave, a description of the crop and activities that the workers are expected to perform at the fixed site. So they're going to be picking apples. How often do I need to renew my FLC? This is your FLC is good for your first year, your second year, and every other year. Now, this is how often you need to renew it. This is different than how often you need to update it. These FLC licenses require quite a bit of maintenance. So you have to update it. You have to update it every year. And whenever you update it, that's updating your transportation authorization. But you have to actually file a renewal application your second year and then every other year after that. How far in advance do I need to submit my application? Ideally 90 days. It gives the Department of Labor a chance to screw it up and you still resubmit it without issue. And we have had it before where they've just straight up lost applications. I mean, it's happened enough times to where I'd say, please submit 90 days in advance of the expiration of your FLC. And that'll prevent any sort of issues because you'll get an authority to operate letter timely, and the Department of Labor will graciously continue to certify your application. The Department of Labor doesn't charge for farm labor contractors license applications. I kind of wish they would, because then maybe they would have more resources to get through them a little bit faster, even if they charge some nominal amount. But they don't charge for them right now, and so that is just where it is. And so it takes a while to get through them. But that is the end of the actual slideshow. But yeah, so now we can, if you want to, we can go ahead and get into any Q&As. If you have Q&A, or if you have any questions, just put it in the Q&A box there, and I'll answer any questions that you have, whether they're H-2A related or otherwise. So I got a question here. How often do you need to renew agreements with a customer or farmer? You'll need new agreements every time you file an H-2A application. So the date range on your agreement with your farmers would say, and now what you could potentially do, if you are working for the same farmer and you're harvesting multiple crops, for example, let's say that I have an agreement with a farmer that I'm going to harvest their sweet potatoes during this month, their blueberries during this month. You can have one agreement that has an itinerary of those different crops. And then you wouldn't have to get a new agreement for each of those separate H-2A applications if you had them on separate H-2A applications. But you would need to get a new agreement every year to show the itinerary of your planned work activities. How much agricultural work do I need to bring H-2A workers? So all of the work performed by H-2A workers needs to be agricultural work. So this question comes up actually pretty often, like, can I be performing 80% agricultural work with H-2A workers and 20% non-agricultural workers? And the answer is no. If you're going to be using H-2A workers, they need to be performing agricultural work. And that is something that the Department of Labor takes very, very seriously because they can see it as misuse of the H-2A program. So they get pretty worked up about that. So any work that they are performing needs to be agricultural. What other questions might folks have? I got one question. Okay, if I would like to use H-2A workers to construct irrigation pivots, how would I handle the agreements with the farmers when I have 100 plus pivots or customers? So if you have 100 plus pivot customers and you are looking at, you would need to go to the various customers and say, this is part of our process. We have to have this agreement with the Department of Labor, and then you would put all the work sites on the itinerary. One thing that you can also do if you don't know everyone over the course of the year is you can separate your filings into multiple filings. So let's say that your working season is from March 1st through December 15th. And you know where your guys are going to be for the first 4 months. You can file an H-2A application to cover the first 4 months, and then file another one to cover the next 4 months, and then transfer them from one application to the other. That way you can capture all the work sites in there. Do shops for farmers qualify as agriculture? So I'm assuming that this is a question as it relates to construction. So does the construction of a shop for farmers qualify as agriculture? That depends on a few variables there. The way that construction qualifies under the H-2A regulations is work there's 2 separate elements that you need to consider. Work that's being performed on a farm or by a farmer. So let's assume that you're not a farmer, you're a farm labor contractor. So that means that your work needs to, first of all, be performed on a farm. If it's not being performed on a farm, it's not agriculture. Now, let's say that it is being performed on a farm. The second question needs to be as an incident to or in conjunction with the primary farming activity. So the primary farming activity, let's assume that it is the growth, let's say it's a corn production. I think that there's a good argument to be made that the construction of a shop would qualify because in the growing of corn or soybeans, I need dry locations to store my equipment from being damaged. My various things related to the crop activities. I think there's a very strong argument to be made that the construction of a shop on a farm for the purposes of storing their things that are necessary to produce their agricultural crop is considered agriculture. I would certainly think that would qualify. But if it's being performed not on a farm, automatically doesn't qualify. If it's being performed and not intended to aid the production of a crop, it doesn't qualify. So, if you're building a barn dominium for them, it wouldn't qualify. If you're building, this is a kind of a common one in Texas. We're big agritourism here. You can come to Texas and go to a lot of wineries around here, for example, and the wineries have they're a farm, but then on the farm they also have a restaurant, or they'll have some sort of parking apparatus for the people that are coming to visit, or they'll have a bar. It wouldn't qualify as agriculture for them to be building the restaurant, for example, because it's on a farm, because that is a independent productive activity, which is not related to the production of the crop. The production of the crop being, in that case, grapes. What are we required to provide the workers? There's a lot of things that you're required to provide workers. You have to provide workers all of the tools and supplies necessary to perform the work, first of all. So if let's say you're performing agricultural construction, you would be required to provide them the necessary tools to do so. You're required to provide them inbound transportation costs, including their meals and hotel stay from their home city to the consulate, from the consulate to the place of employment, and then from the place of, and then when they complete the work contract, from the place of employment to back to their home site. Those are some of the main things that you're required to pay for. You're also required to pay for their embassy fees. They can't pay for any of the attorney's fees. You have to provide housing and transportation at no cost to the worker as well. Workers also cannot pay for the opportunity to come on an H-2A visa. So there's a lot of things you have to provide. Basically, when in doubt, don't charge the workers. What if the shop is for machines and has a partial living space? Okay, so building a barn, there's a partial living space, and also, I guess that I think that it still goes to what's the purpose of the building. Is the purpose of the building to store the machines and happens to have a bed in it, then I think it's still probably fine. If it's a big giant house and then has a garage for a tractor, I think that they would think otherwise. So it's going to matter a lot what the purpose of the actual building is. Is it made for the production of the crop or not? Okay, so can they drive themselves if they get a license, or do they have to be transported by an FLCE? Both. They can get a license, but they can also get an FLCE. So the H-2A workers can get an FLCE. One thing to know, if your H-2A workers are transporting, or let's say you have a driver, H-2A worker has an FLCE, and then they're driving from the house to the work site every day and taking all the orders back. You need to pay the drivers the drive time. That's a big thing to know. But they can get an FLCE and they can get a license as well. What other questions might we have? This is also another question that comes up pretty often is, okay, well, let's say that I have a home base in Texas and I have work that's being performed in Georgia and work that's being performed in Florida. And I have all my workers come to Texas. They get here the day their work contract starts, and they go through a check-in, and then the first 2 days of their work contract are spent commuting to Florida or Georgia. The question comes, do I need to pay my workers for the transportation time from Texas to Georgia or Florida? I think the Department of Labor has a strong argument that you should, particularly if it's during the work contract period, and would. I think that there's a very strong argument to be made that you should be paying those workers for that transportation time during work hours. So if they're spending time commuting that they could otherwise be spending time working, you should pay them for that transportation time. I think the DOL has a very strong argument in that regard. So that one comes up quite a bit. So this question is, can they drive themselves with a license? Wait, I think it's just license or FLC would work. Okay. So I guess this question is, yeah, the point I think that this one was trying to make was, they could drive themselves with a license or with an FLCE. You have to have a license to get an FLCE. The police aren't going to get mad at your workers for transporting them with just a license and not an FLCE, but the Department of Labor would during an investigation or an audit. So they need both to transport them. What other questions might folks have? All right. I'm going to give you just another 30 seconds or so for any other questions that might come up. And then, as always, if you have any questions that come up that we didn't address or you thought about afterwards, you can always feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer questions about anything, but H-2A is particularly fun for me. So if you do have questions that pop up, feel free to email me and let me know. But other than that, if y'all don't have any other questions, we can end this thing. All righty. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I appreciate it. We'll talk to everyone soon. We'll be having another webinar soon enough. So if you have any other questions in the meantime, let me know. Thanks.